Hello everyone, I'm PotatoWhiskers. Welcome back to Timmy Time. Are you terrified of the endless yawning depths of the ocean? On several if not all planes of magic you should be, and I think my fear of the deep is what drew me to Arixmethes' Slumbering Isle. On top of being a ridiculous 12-12, he has a unique mechanic where he enters the battlefield as a land, and the only way to get him up and at him is to cast at least 5 spells once he's sleeping on the battlefield. Each spell removes 1 slumber counter, and once they're gone, he can swing for a deadly 2-shot commander damage kill. So, let's talk strategy. This deck does primarily kill via commander damage, but that's purely because of the size of our commander, and his size definitely means that opponents will have answers waiting for the precise moment he becomes vulnerable. So, with a combination of ramp and other terrifying creatures, we're going to keep the attention off of our slumbering buddy. Let's start off by going into my Timmy top 3 for this deck. Starting small, Reef Worm might sound like a bad deal for 3 and a blue, but luckily this little guy is just the beginning. As soon as it dies, we create a 3-3 fish, and then when that dies, we get a 6-6 whale, and finally, when that token dies, we get a 9-9 Kraken. I like the idea behind this card a lot, and regardless of its usefulness, the flavor behind it is what really makes it a top 3 pick. I mean, just look at that art. Murkfiend Liege is my second top 3 pick. Like the other Liege cards, it buffs other creatures that share either of its 2 colors, granting +1/+1 for each color. What makes it a top 3 pick for me is that we get to untap all green/blue creatures we control during each other player's untap step. And with the amount of mana dorks we have, it means we can semi-safely tap down all our lands for the big plays coming up, like Colossal Whale. This guy has Island Walk, and whenever he attacks, we may exile 2 target creatures defending player controls until he leaves the battlefield. I affectionately call him Monstro. Now, let's talk mana. We have a variety of tools at our disposal to boost how much mana we have available to us each turn, like cheating lands onto the battlefield with Thrasios Triton Hero. His effect lets us scry 1 for 4 generic, then we reveal the top card of our library. If it's a land, we put it right onto the battlefield, otherwise we just draw a card. Another merfolk to help us extract more lands from our library, Jade Light Ranger explores twice when she enters the battlefield, which lets us reveal the top card of our library and put it into our hand if it's a land. Otherwise, we put a 1/1 counter on our ranger and then choose to put the card back or into our graveyard. Moving on to some familiar territory, we've got Oracle of Moldiah and Azusa Laspa Seeking to take advantage of the surplus lands in our hand. We've also got a Parade of Dorks to help us ramp up faster and give us something cheap and useful to cast to get those slumber counters off of our commander. Paradise Druid is first, a solid 2-mana creature that taps for 1 mana of any color, and she has hexproof as long as she's untapped. Next up is Whisper of the Wilds. This creature taps for 1 green, or if we have a creature with power 4 or greater, we can add double green instead. Llanowar Elves is next, the classic 1-mana dork. This guy produces 1 green. Marleaf Pixie flutters in, tapping for either of our colors to help our color spread, and Weaver of Currents taps for 2 colorless mana to help us pay those generic costs. If you thought I wasn't running Crewfix God of Horizons, then you'd be wrong. What's the best way to make sure we have tons of mana to use? Stockpile it. Crewfix also gives us no maximum hand size, which we might need if we hit our card draw stride. Another good way to get mana for those big plays: steal it from someone else. Plasm Capture counters a target spell, and at the beginning of our next pre-combat main phase, we get to add X mana in any combination of colors, where X was the countered spell's converted mana cost. Not today, Nexus of Fate. Most of you will be familiar with Kodama's Reach. If you aren't, it hunts through our library for up to 2 basic land cards, we reveal them, and then put 1 into play tapped and the other into our hand. Then we can get that land out of our hand and replace it with something else, with something like Growth Spiral, a card that lets us draw a card, then put a land card onto the battlefield. Unexpected Results makes an expected appearance. This Simic-flavored card lets us shuffle our library and then reveal the top card. If it's a non-land card, we may cast it without paying its mana cost. But if it's a land, we put it into play and return Unexpected Results to our hand. Sol Ring and Dreamstone Hedron hang around to help us pay those generic costs so we can utilize our colored mana more effectively. Fertile Ground, Overgrowth, and Dawn's Reflection all help with that too, by enchanting lands to boost the mana they produce. Fertile Ground lets us add an extra mana of any color, Overgrowth adds an extra double green, and Dawn's Reflection lets us add 2 mana of any combination of colors. Bounty of the Luxa is another great way to boost our mana and draw cards on alternating turns. At the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, we remove all flood counters from Bounty of the Luxa. If you're wondering what a flood counter is, don't worry, you're not alone. If none were removed this way, we may put a flood counter on it and draw a card. But if we did remove any flood counters, we add 1 generic, a green, and a blue to our mana pool. So, remember how that commander of ours taps for 1 green and blue? Well, I've got a nifty little enchantment you may not have heard of called Pemin's Aura. It has a total of 4 abilities, but the first one is where the fun is. For 1 blue, we can untap the enchanted creature, meaning if Arixmethes is enchanted, we have an infinite amount of green mana at our disposal. The other 3 abilities are pretty fun too. For 1 blue, we can give enchanted creature flying, or using the third ability, give it Shroud. If that wasn't already enough, we can dump that excess green mana into the fourth ability, which costs 1 generic, giving enchanted creature +1/-1 or -1/+1 until end of turn. And since Arixmethes is a 12/12, with this play, we can hit an opponent for lethal commander damage with a 21/3 Kraken with flying and Shroud. Dialing things down just a little, Favor of the Overbeing gives the enchanted creature +1/+1 and vigilance if it's green, and +1/+1 and flying if it's blue. So that's another good way to get our commander damage through. If you'd rather our other creatures do the legwork, then Dragon Throne of Tarkir is right up your alley. An artifact equipment that gives the Equipped Creature Defender and a tap ability for 2 generic that says other creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is this creature's power. Let's get further into that card draw I mentioned earlier, starting with Storm Surge Kraken. Its Lieutenant ability gives it +2/+2, and whenever Storm Surge Kraken becomes blocked, you may draw 2 cards. With that hexproof, it's going to be difficult to destroy as well. Cold-Eyed Selkie has Island Walk and draws us a card for each point of combat damage it deals to a player. Tishana, Voice of Thunder, gives us no maximum hand size, and we're going to need it because on entry she draws us cards equal to the number of creatures we control. And then, count those cards up in your hand because that's her power and toughness now. Yet another no maximum hand size card, Nezahal, Primal Tide, can't be countered, and draws us a card whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell. Lastly, if he's in trouble, we can discard 3 cards from our hand to flicker him, returning him to our battlefield tapped at the next end step. Nadir Kraken is a creature that asks us to pay a measly 1 generic whenever we draw. If we do, he gets a +1/+1 counter, and we create a 1/1 tentacle creature token. A more scholarly way to take advantage of those draws, though, Tolarian Kraken lets us pay the same cost and untap or tap target creature. All big things have small beginnings, which is why I think Kraken Hatchling is useful to have. For 1 blue, we get a 0/4 creature to keep our life safe for a few turns while we do our early game thing. Enough about early game, though. Now it's time to crack our knuckles and call the Krakens. Breaching Leviathan is where I'll start. When it enters the battlefield, if we cast it from our hand, all non-blue creatures on the battlefield become tapped and don't untap during their controller's next untap step. Very bad for our mana dorks, very good for our fish. Like Fleet Swallower. If I'm gonna play mill, I'm gonna go hard. When Fleet Swallower attacks, the defending player puts the top half of their library into their graveyard. Rounded up, I might add. But let's get back to tapping creatures, because we can do a lot of that. Not with Archipelago, though. I'm gonna be honest, I just like the way this card looks and that it's a 7/7 body. It is good for a 1 mutate trigger at least, and the thing I like about mutate is that I can take a creature like Nadir Kraken or Kraken Hatchling and make its base power and toughness bigger. So on Nadir Kraken, those 1/1 counters do more work. Elder Deep Fiend lets us tap up to 4 target permanents when we cast it, and it has flash so we can do some surprise shenanigans. It also has one of the least memorable mechanics, Emerge. Without looking at the screen, honestly try to remember what Emerge does. The card's sitting right in front of me and I can't remember. Moving on, Shipbreaker Kraken has one of my top 5 favorite mechanics with Monstrosity. Not only does it get bigger, but in addition, we get to tap up to 4 target creatures. Those creatures then don't untap during their controller's untap step for as long as we control Shipbreaker Kraken, keeping enemy creatures tapped down, giving other creatures like my Simic Sky Swallower less obstacles for that trample damage. Along those same lines, we can make our smaller creatures more useful with Octopus Umbra. It's a creature enchantment that makes the enchanted creature an 8/8, and whenever this creature attacks, you may tap target creature with power 8 or less. It also has Totem Armor, which says if enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. By saying 8 more than 3 times, I have now summoned the Lord of Octopuses himself, Lorthos the Tidemaker. He's an 8 mana 8/8 with an attack trigger that says whenever Lorthos attacks, you may pay 8. If you do, tap up to 8 target permanents. Those permanents don't untap during their controller's untap steps. Our final way to keep our opponent's creatures tapped so we can make sure we can swing straight to home is to ensure our opponents always swing at something. Pursued Whale does just that. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent creates a 1/1 red pirate creature token that cannot block and forces all creatures that player controls to attack each turn if able. On top of being an 8/8, Pursued Whale also makes spells your opponents cast at it cost 3 more to cast, so it's not likely to be dealt with. We aren't done with ways to make our monsters unavoidable, though. Aqueous Form costs 1 blue for a creature enchantment that makes the enchanted creature unblockable, and whenever that creature attacks, we scry 1. Seriously though, this card is a 55-cent common with art done by a guy with the last name Maniac. Some might even call it crazy. Another fun way to make sure your damage gets through is with Tromokratis. This Kraken has hexproof unless it's attacking or blocking, and it can't be blocked unless all creatures defending player controls block it. Alternatively though, for the same effect with less Tromokratis death, Serpent of the Yawning Depths makes it so that Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents can only be blocked by Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents. Kasseto Orochi Archmage can make target creature unblockable for only 1 green and blue, and while we won't get the +2/+2 buff that's reserved for snake creatures, it's cheap and sneaky and I like it. Next up, Hadana's Climb is a transforming legendary enchantment that costs 1 green and a blue and says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Then if that creature has 3 or more 1/1 counters on it, transform Hadana's Climb into Winged Temple of Eroska, a legendary land that can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, or by paying 1, a green and a blue, and tapping it, we can give target creature we control flying and +X, where X is its power. Having Vigor in play can help us flip this over even faster, since it prevents damage dealt to our creatures and gives them +1/+1 counters when damage is prevented this way. A lot of creatures have flying though, so Archetype of Imagination is here to take that away and make sure that we're the only ones who get to soar above the clouds. If my Inkwell Leviathan can't use Island Walk, I'll make it fly instead. If all that fails, fear not, because we've got some inherently unblockable creatures to sneak through enemy lines, like Elusive Crassus, a 0/4 base power and toughness with Evolve that gives him a +1/+1 counter whenever a creature with greater power enters the battlefield under our control, like Tidal Kraken for example, a 6/6 with Unblockable. Or if you want to watch your opponents sweat, then cast a Deep Sea Kraken for its suspend cost, and they'll hesitate to cast spells lest they remove a time counter from this unblockable monster. Our final way to ensure our attacks strike true is by shooing creatures back to our opponent's hands. Tidespout Tyrant returns a target permanent to its owner's hand whenever we cast a spell. Scourge of Fleets returns each creature our opponents control with toughness less than the number of islands we control to its owner's hand. Selin Voda the Rising Deep is a little more selective, requiring not only a kicker cost, but also returning all creatures on the battlefield to their owner's hands, exempting, get ready for it, Merfolk, Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents, of course. Much cheaper than Slin is Whelming Wave, a sorcery with the same effect, but does not include Merfolk. Crush of Tentacles and Devastation Tide both return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. Crush of Tentacles gives us an 8/8 Octopus token if it was cast for its Surge cost, and Devastation Tide may be cast for its Miracle cost when it's drawn, and only if it's the first card we've drawn that turn. Lastly, we've got Simic Charm, which gives us the option of giving target creature +3/+3 until end of turn, giving permanents we control hexproof, or, on theme, returning a target creature to its owner's hand. So, to be able to get these huge creatures out, we can't rely on mana ramp alone. Backup plans for backup plans, right? Quest for Ulah's Temple is a pretty harmless looking wall of text for 1 blue at first, but let's see what it does. At the beginning of our upkeep, we may look at the top card of our library. If it's a creature, we may reveal it and give our enchantment 1 quest counter. Then, at the beginning of each end step, if we have 3 or more quest counters on our enchantment, we may put a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent from our hand into play. Reason to Believe is a 2-part play that involves us first scrying 3, and then using Believe from our graveyard to look at the top card of our library and put it into play if it's a creature. If it isn't, we put it into our hand. Vivian's Invocation works along similar lines, letting us take a look at the top 7 cards of our library and put a creature card from among them into play. Then we put the rest on the bottom of our library, and the creature we chose deals damage equal to its power to an opponent's creature. Mosswort Bridge is a land with Hideaway that lets us stash a creature card in exile, and for 1 green we can tap the land to play the card we hid away for free if creatures we control have total power 10 or greater. Next, my 3 planeswalkers of this deck take the stage. Kiora, Kiora, and Kiora. Yes, the only planeswalker in this deck is a merfolk, don't at me. Kiora Behemoth Beckoner has one of those fun planeswalker passive abilities that lets us draw a card whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under our control. We can also use her -1 ability a limited number of times to untap a target permanent, like our commander, maybe? Kiora the Crashing Wave lets us put our opponent's most dangerous creature in a safety bubble until our next turn with her +1 ability, and her -1 draws us a card and allows us to play an additional land this turn. Lastly, her -5 gives us an emblem that spawns a 9/9 Kraken at the beginning of each of our end steps. Kiora, Master of the Depths, +1 lets us untap up to 1 target creature and 1 target land. Her -2 lets us choose a creature or land card from among the top 4 cards of our library to put into our hand and toss the rest to the grave. And finally, her -8 gives us an emblem that has whenever you cast a creature spell, you may have it fight target creature. And then we put 3 8/8 blue octopus creature tokens into play, which may or may not be looking to brawl. Finally, we're coming down to the end with the Land Lightning round, starting with Rogue's Passage to add another way to make a creature unblockable, Dark Depths hopefully last long enough for Merit Lodge to come party, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx to help us utilize all those little mana symbols we've got floating around on permanents, Command Tower, Simic Growth Chamber, Thornwood Falls, Woodland Stream, Hinterland Harbor, and Temple of Mystery, all tap for 1 or more of our colors, and last but not least, Evolving Wilds to help correct our in-game mana. Thank you to everyone for watching this episode of Timmy Time. Please don't be afraid to comment some feedback, and if you like what you see, then go ahead and hit subscribe to legally become a french fry. I'll see you all in the next episode of Timmy Time, which you'll see a sneak peek of now.